Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature. This is kind of chapter 1 and maybe chapter 2 of the Lefay Fragment, entitled The Lefay Fragment.
From Past Watchful Dragons. But originally it was from one of Lewis's journals.
Yes, we do have, there's an interesting bit of history to this document, which we will definitely get into in a little bit. But today, I'll just hit that back in. Manuscript that C.S. Lewis wrote in the late 40s that was kind of the beginning of The Magician's Nephew, but he abandoned it literally mid-sentence, which we'll get to in a moment.
Ultimate cliffhanger. We're actually, in honor of this, we're going to end the podcast, right? I'm just kidding.
But he and many of these ideas do show up in other places, but we are going to be covering the Lefay Fragment today, just like we would cover any other chapter in the Chronicles of Narnia. So we have a little bit of history that maybe I'll mention first, and then I've written a summary for us, 149 words here, and we'll go through it kind of one little bit at a time. Just like old times.
And if you have the song How to Save a Life stuck in your head, you're not alone, because the Lefay Fragment and the Fray are very similar to me.
Dude, I love that album.
It's a really good album.
Cable
Car? Come on.
Any other music after that?
I'm sure they did. I just remember it being used in the they had a new song.
Oh, it was in the Lost.
It was in the Lost
yes.
preview for season 4.
I do
which
remember this.
I had because I clicked on anything that was free on iTunes because I was desperate for content and I didn't have a credit card.
Well, the Lefay Fragment was found actually after Jack's death. So before Lewis died, he had given orders to Warnie, his brother, to really just burn a ton of old letters in manuscripts which had been stored away. And this did happen. We have very little of Lewis's writing. Now, we've mentioned on the show before that Jack wrote most of his books by hand. He used the dip pen for the most part, and he wrote them mostly by hand. And then later on, they would be typed up on a typewriter.
By a person.
But usually by Warnie, actually, I believe.
Oh, really?
Warnie would type them up. But he had all these manuscripts, and he did not keep a lot of these things. He also didn't keep a lot of his old letters, too. That's why on most of the letters that we have of Lewis, we just have we don't have what's written to him, because he would receive a letter and usually would discard it. Right. We obviously have the ones that he wrote because they were mailed to other people. But after he died, he gave orders for so many of these things to be burned and destroyed. And according to legend...
Well, he gave the order and then he died.
Yes, correct. It wasn't after. He didn't show up like Obi-Wan. Luke, I have to tell you something.
You need to burn all this stuff. Don't read it.
According to legend, Walter Hooper arrives at the kilns just as Warnie is about to burn and destroy a bunch of these manuscripts and letters, and he actually was able to save a good portion of them from being destroyed. And one of those writings was the Lefay Fragment, which is what we're talking about today. It's this early version of the Chronicles of Narnia. He also saved some other things, which he publishes, Walter Hooper does, in his book, Past Watchful Dragons, which is where you and I read this today. It just came back into print in the last 10 years or so. It had been out of print for a while, but you can get off Amazon. It's like $15 or so. It's fantastic. It's a great book, even if you're not simply just reading the manuscripts, but the entire manuscript is in there, as well as some notes he has. There's like a diary of Eustace's from Dawn Treader. I kept reading after I had finished this. I don't know if you did either.
I kept reading the comparisons to the actual Magician's Nephew book, but then I stopped before the journal entry, but that's next. I want to read that. So
there's a good bit of stuff there. And then he talks a lot about the creation of Narnia. This is Walter Hooper, and he talks... I think we actually pulled from this particular book when we covered The Last Battle, because I think it's Hooper that makes the argument that The Last Battle is the best of the Chronicles, and he talks about there. So I think it was here that we pulled from. But again, it's not even a long book. It's only about 130 pages. If you haven't picked it up, it's one of my favorite books about Narnia. And again, it's not just, there's a lot of great books like this, but it's not some random professor who didn't know. I mean, this is a guy who literally knew Jack, right, and was really handpicked by him, to be his secretary before Lewis actually passed away. And so, Hooper himself just really gets these stories, and so I'd highly recommend reading it there. I don't think it's available online. The manuscript. I think the only place you can actually read it is here in the book. I even looked for it because I've been away. I've been traveling for the last week or so, and as we were gone, I was like, I'm going to go back and reread it again. And I just searched for it, could not find it easily. Again, I was searching on my phone with a kid in the room, so I didn't search really well.
You didn't try super hard.
But it did not come up when I searched Lefay Fragment, it did not easily pop up like that.
Yeah. I'll tell you, for this season, we've been doing a mix of stuff. You've printed out a few things. You've sent PDFs. We have a shared folder. And then we actually have bought a couple of books, and then we have been reading those. I really enjoyed having this one printed in a book.
Oh, yeah. Just, all the paper,
even the way it's typeset, it just feels...
It's a great typeset here. It looks like a typewriter.
It looks like someone printed this out a long time ago or had it printed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we believe that there is a little bit of conflict over when exactly this was written, but everything I've read says it most likely is written sometime before July 1949. So if you're playing along at home, following along with us, you know that Wardrobe is published in October of 1950, but it had been finished obviously a little before that. And so Lewis has finished Wardrobe and jumps, we believe, right into writing the Lefay Fragment here, but abandons it. He talks a little bit about struggling with where it's going. He's not really liking some things, and so he just abandons it and doesn't really return to what will eventually become The Magician's Nephew. And we have actually mentioned this before. It's actually the last book he finishes. He even finishes The Last Battle before he finishes The Magician's Nephew. So sometime he kind of abandons this before even Wardrobe is published. But as we'll get to while we go through this, there's quite a few things that really show up. In fact, the conversation between Diggory and Polly, because those are our two main characters here, when they first meet is almost word for word reused again in The Magician's Nephew.
Right.
Some things are also very different.
And he'll pick something out. So I don't feel like he completely abandoned it. I understand that he abandoned it as a whole, but he picked pieces out of it and maybe repurposed them for a different piece of the story. And we'll go through that.
Yes. From what we understand, he was attempting to write an origin story for. It was supposed to be a prequel to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But there's some weird stuff here. Some stuff that makes me a little confused about what exactly Lewis is doing, because we get stuff here in this that is nothing we've seen in Narnia before, including a good amount of magic outside of Narnia that doesn't seem to involve any Narnians whatsoever. So why don't I go ahead and read the summary and then we'll dive in.
Before you do, I want to address that. I'm not sure we should be reading this.
Oh, you don't think we should be?
I feel really strange about this because I think that Lewis put so much work and care into the final product.
Sure.
Which is all we've read before. And we've also read letters, but those are final products too. But a final published work is very different than something that he started and then abandoned. I'm also fascinated by it. I'm so glad we have this.
He did also have orders for this to be destroyed.
He wanted this to be destroyed. Someone did not follow his wishes, and now that's why we have it.
And now we're podcasting about it.
And now we're spreading it even further to our massive network of listeners.
Millions upon millions.
Thousands of battle droids.
No, it's clone. You did the Tanwi voice when you said that. So I guess you couldn't do
magnificent, aren't they?
You can't do the Nemoidian voice.
No, I just
we get banned.
Yeah, I also feel uncomfortable about that.
Well, can I read the summary now, or what else do you have to say?
The other point was that I'm really glad that we have this. I feel the same way about some of Tolkien's work.
Oh, interesting.
Where he put a lot of work into creating a world, and then he wrote a very difficult and complex story, and he did a really good job. And then a bunch of his other stuff that wasn't completed was then edited and then published after he died. And I think that's really different. And it's also hard because you can't help but compare it to the published work. Mm-hmm. And it's a mix. I'm glad we have it, and it's really, really interesting, especially something that we've read multiple times, and we're so familiar with these stories at this point. But then to see this early version, it really does reveal a lot about the work that went into these stories.
Sure.
Because you can't help but think, he makes it look so easy. You can't help but think, oh, he just wrote down these stories as he made them up.
Yeah.
He did it in one draft. But no, he put a lot into this. And the fact that what you were just saying, the fact that he didn't finish this book until the very end when he was going to connect it to everything, that shows a lot too, because he was working on this almost the longest stretch of time.
Yeah. All right. So here is a summary of, like I said, it feels like it's more than just one chapter, but let's just go ahead and do it as if it would be just one chapter. A boy named Diggory lives with his obnoxious aunt in England. Despite her tempestuous nature, Diggory's life is quite enjoyable because his aunt is usually away on grown-up errands. He spends his time conversing with the trees and animals in the woods behind her house. On one particular day, Diggory meets a girl next door named Polly, who overhears him talking to a squirrel. She explains that she is attempting to build a raft and suggests using a branch from the oak, who's one of Diggory's friends. Pressured by Polly, Diggory chops off a branch from the oak tree. It begins to rain and both children return back to their homes. The next day, Diggory is horrified to learn that he can no longer talk to trees and animals. At the same time, Diggory's godmother, Mrs. Lefay, arrives at the house and the fragment ends mid-conversation.
That's the only way to end that. It really does. It just drops off.
I'll read the very last sentence here. We'll probably return to it because I want to read maybe that whole paragraph. But for listeners who don't have the fragment in front of them, here's the final sentence. Then you must go into the shop and you'll see. What will he see?
There's a list of directions on how to get to someone's house, and it just stops in the middle of a sentence.
Aunt Lefay, or godmother, this is Mrs. Lefay, is giving him directions to get somewhere, and she says, when you get into the shop, you'll see, and then Lewis never finished it.
Yep.
So let's talk about this. Let's go back to the beginning of this story, and right off the bat, the first thing that shows up here, let me read the first paragraph because I think it will sound a little bit, or why don't you go ahead and read it since I just did the summary. What does that first paragraph say?
Once there was a boy called Diggory who lived with his aunt because his father and mother were both dead. His aunt, whose name was Gertrude, was not at all a nice person. Years ago, she had been a schoolmistress and bullied the girls. Then she became a headmistress and bullied the mistresses. Then she became an inspector and bullied headmistresses. Then she went into Parliament and became a minister of something and bullied everybody. Sure sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It sounds very, very familiar. I love the fact that years later, Lewis is like, you know what? That was a really great description. I'm going to use that again. Obviously, he uses this for the headmistress of the experiment house at the end of the Silver Chair, where the head there goes on to work in Parliament and seems to do very well there. Mm-hmm. Right? She keeps getting promoted.
I wonder if he literally cut and pasted.
So considering he wrote it by hand, I would assume no.
Yeah.
This was not typed up as far as we know. I did find a picture of it a few weeks ago when I was first reading this, of the actual note someone had taken, like a photocopy.
Okay.
And you could see where he had written, you could see Jack's handwriting, which was really neat. But I don't think it ever was even typed up. I think it was all just, this literal fragment on...
Yeah, this was in one of his journals, right?
Yes, correct.
Which is why it was more likely to survive.
I guess so. I guess that's why. Well, so we get here from the beginning that Diggory is, he's an orphan. His mother and father are dead, which we know is not true, right? Lewis he writes a little bit of his own story into Diggory and the Magician's Nephew, where, his mother is very sick and very ill, but unlike Lewis's mother who passes away when he's young, Diggory's able to save his mother with the apple from the garden, right? We have here, though, that even though, Gertrude is not at all a nice person, as Lewis writes, he goes on to say, it might have been expected that Diggory, who had to live with his aunt, would have led a very unhappy life. But there were two things that very nearly made up for it. One was that his aunt was very seldom at home. Then the second piece of good fortune is that Diggory can talk to both trees and animals. Lewis says this, if an oak said anything to you or me, we should be very surprised. In fact, we should either feel rather frightened or think we were dreaming. But Diggory was not surprised at all, for it had been happening to him all of his life. That was his second piece, or part of his second piece of good fortune. Ever since he could remember, he had the gift of being able to understand the trees and flowers. When he was very small, he had supposed that everybody could do the same. Later on, he found out that no one but himself could do it, and soon he stopped talking about it for fear of being laughed at. Nobody knew about it except his great school friend, the one he had wanted to go and see that day, and even he didn't always quite believe it. That was why Diggory was not at all surprised when the oak spoke to him. So
this is so interesting.
This is very interesting for a prequel. You wonder where Lewis would go with this, because in the chronicles as they exist in the canon of Narnia, there is no magic that we see outside of Narnia. Now, some magic from Narnia gets into our world, right? We see that in The Magician's Nephew multiple times when things come out, especially using the rings, right? We see things brought out. We see this happen at the end of The Silver Chair when Caspian comes out after his death and is in Aslan's country, and he goes in and fights off the bullies at the experiment house. So we see that there is some overlap, but I don't think there's any time where magic just appears to occur on its own outside of Narnia. And again, as far as we get in this very short fragment, Diggory just seems to be able to have this special, almost like a superpower in a way. What do you make of this? This is wild.
Did he trim it down to just the rings? How would you categorize the rings that take them to?
Oh, I guess that is magic, though, isn't it?
But that is it, and that could have theoretically come from somewhere else.
The story that we hear from Uncle Andrew, and again, one of the things we have to remember is that Uncle Andrew is a liar. Mm-hmm. But the story we get from Uncle Andrew, I believe, is that he got them from his own godmother named Lefay. Mm-hmm. So not Diggory's godmother, but Uncle Andrew's godmother.
And that she was bad.
Which,
if Uncle Andrew is saying it, probably means she was good.
Who knows? Yeah, we have no idea. Or
but the goal was Atlantean.
Right?
Why did I say Atlantean?
No, that's fine.
Atlantean dust or
Atlantean dust of some kind. Yeah. So I guess you're right. I was wrong. There is that bit of magic that exists outside of Narnia. But it's and in both of these scenarios, we're not really told, because even A Magician's Nephew, Lewis doesn't really give us any. He's it's Atlantean dust, and then he kind of moves on. And same here, at least in this short fragment, we don't know where the story would have gone. It's just kind of explained of he just can do it, and he goes on.
Yeah,
interesting. Well, see, I still think the thing that's different, though, is we could imagine that Atlantean dust still could have come from another world, whereas Diggory just seems to have this ability.
Right. And where did that ability come from?
Within him.
Yeah.
So interesting. I thought this was really interesting from Diggory's perspective, too, because one of the things that surprised me is how much Diggory and Polly both felt exactly like Diggory and Polly from Magician's Nephew.
Yeah. And I'm curious how much of that. I'm curious where this falls in Lewis's draft. So where did he write about Diggory for pages and pages and pages, and we just will never see that?
Well, no, this is the beginning of the book.
Right, but in preparation for writing this fragment.
Did he have notes about it? Oh, okay.
Because it seems really close to what the final product is. And that can happen. You know, the legend with J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter is that he just walked into her head fully formed.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which makes all the lawsuits kind of interesting when people sue her for copyright infringement. I don't believe any of those, but I do think it's interesting when a character, quote, walks into your mind fully formed. Sure. But I certainly feel like Lewis could have done that. He could have just written down a character and then it works that well. But the number of things that he ended up changing is really interesting. And I'm curious why he even tried to have magic in this world and the ability to talk to animals, because this is after he wrote Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
This is after Wardrobe has been completed.
Yeah,
so it's already been sent to the publisher, I believe, by the summer of 1949.
Yep.
So it's done.
Yeah.
Isn't that another great question? Is does he? And I would assume he does. Again, that totally just an assumption. I don't think we'll ever really know, but I think knowing that this is a prequel, it probably would make sense that he already knows that Diggory will be the professor, because we just finished it, but we've been reading The Lion, the Witch, and Wardrobe at my son's bedtime, And we got to that final chapter, chapter 17, The Hunting of the White Stag, where the professor says that line of, once a king or queen in Narnia, always a king or queen in Narnia. And then, of course, how does he know that? He said, you won't be getting back that way. I mean, it's clear even from the first draft that this guy knows not just, he's wise and he knows that there's magic. Like, he knows about Narnia itself.
Yeah.
So I think it is probably a decent guess that he already knows that Diggory in this prequel will become the professor. So is there, I don't know, I think one of the interesting things, and maybe we'll get to it in a moment when we talk about Diggory losing this ability, is maybe Lewis is trying to tell us a little bit more about our own world and kind of its disenchanted age, and the fact that he loses this ability when he goes and hurts the oak. Again, we talk a lot. I mean, think about how often we talk about Lewis and Tolkien and their love of trees and their love of nature and their love of caring for the creation care. Diggory goes on and hurts this oak, and that gift is gone. He's like severed a connection between himself and creation when he kind of does this thing, which is interesting. Yeah. Well, maybe we'll come back to that though, because we're not quite there. In fact, we have to meet a character who also will show up again, but not in Magician's Nephew, but in Prince Caspian. Who do we have here?
This is Pattertwig. We get the early draft Pattertwig.
We have the early version of Pattertwig here, who is a very he's a very busy squirrel, would be a great way of putting it. We know he has that. He's very hyperactive. He's very enthusiastic, and which is what he's like in Caspian. In fact, one of the few sentences that's almost lifted directly from this fragment into Caspian is at one point he offers Diggory, because Diggory's been a little sick recently and they haven't seen him, and he's like, "Hey, would you like a nut?" And he goes and gets a nut, even though Diggory's not. He's like, winter's coming. You might not want to spare it. He's like, no, I'm going to go do it anyways. And Diggory knows he's supposed to look away, because it's really bad manners if you look to see where, a squirrel keeps all the nuts that he's hoarding for the winter.
That's part of what makes this so enjoyable, is just seeing these little pieces that Lewis clearly loved, knew was good.
He's like, that's good. I love that. And what I love about that is not like he just has it in a draft on Microsoft Word somewhere. He's like, let me go copy and paste it. Like, that's written. I mean, that mostly is in his head, you would assume, or he's keeping those manuscripts around and going, what was that great line again?
Yeah.
Either way.
I doubt he was going, what was that great line again?
No, you think he's just in his head.
Based on the fact that he could remember everything he ever read.
Yeah, you just think he's like, I loved that thing about the squirrel.
Yeah.
I'm gonna throw that back in there.
Absolutely.
So
first of all, just there's so many spots where he capitalizes things. Humans has a capital H. The oak has a capital O. Mm-hmm. That was present in Narnia stuff, but it seems like there are even more in this draft.
I mean, he's very much giving, the personification given to the trees and the squirrels. I mean, they feel like real, live characters. They're just as real as Diggory is. And there's one of the interesting lines that Pattertwig has in kind of giving them almost like agency in a way is Pattertwig actually says this: "I'd like to ask what humans are there for at all. I never could see what they did except killing animals or putting them in cages or cutting down trees. No offense, Diggory. We all know you're different."
And then the oak follows up with, "I'm sure I heard something about that question long ago. So long ago, I can't exactly remember it," which this just feels like talking trees.
Mm-hmm. Next sentence, though. What did that next sentence say?
"They were put there for something. You may depend on it. I used to know what it was, but I'm getting old."
I love that. This is a line. This might have been my favorite part of the fragment here. I can't believe I almost skipped over it here. I even have it underlined because this is an idea that doesn't really actually get into the Chronicles at all. Mm-hmm. This line itself, this idea of the trees, which, reminiscing about, or at least thinking about humans. So, humans were put here for a reason, but I can't quite remember what it is anymore.
Yeah. While also establishing that it's not okay to cut down trees.
Oh, interesting too. Yeah.
Which sets that up for a few moments later when Diggory's going to do that exact thing.
Well, again, it's the idea, and we talk about this so much, and if it sounds like we're talking about it ad nauseum, that's because Lewis talked about it and thought about it over and over again. It's that idea of utilitarianism not actually being the be-all, end-all of the world, right? I don't think Lewis would have been like, don't ever chop down any tree ever. He lived in a house after all.
Yeah.
But the idea that if you chop down a tree, it's just there for humans' use. Like humans are only there to dominate and do all. I think he kind of pushes back against that idea here a little bit, as well as reminding us, well, we don't even know why humans are here anymore. Like, what is the reason why humans are here? Right? Lewis talks a lot about it's not just like there is something greater, right? There's something beyond us, and as he pushes back against these modern ideas, right, that even kind of push back on a greater purpose beyond all of this. Lewis is kind of reminding us, especially of his faith here, that no, humans actually have a purpose. There is a reason they are here, and it's not just to use the land or just to continue to better themselves. Right? No, there's actually something greater, and it's a mystery even to the trees. It's been so long since humans really embrace, and this comes back to Lewis as a medievalist. It's been so long since the humans actually embraced what they were made for that even the trees have forgotten. Kind of implying it's been hundreds of years, which could be a good argument for Lewis saying, no, it's been really since the Renaissance and earlier that humans have really, as a whole, lived into what they are meant to be. Which I don't even know if I would fully agree with Lewis on that, but I think that may be one part of the argument that he's making here.
Yeah.
This conversation can't go on for very long, though, because pretty quickly, a little girl shows up. Polly shows up, and Diggory and Polly get introduced to one another. They make fun of how each other have very funny names. The only difference this time, though, is that Diggory isn't crying. Remember, he's crying in The Magician's Nephew.
Blubbing.
That's right.
Blubbing. No,
But
he wasn't. Yes, he was.
He is not here. He's not crying here. And one of the interesting things that happens that we obviously don't get in Magician's Nephew is Diggory trying to figure out how to explain who he has been talking to.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about this scene, because it's fantastic.
I just love that he says he was talking to a squirrel, and Polly actually becomes interested, and she stops playing with a bit of wood, which the squirrel was annoyed with for some reason. I'm not sure why it's not okay to play with a dead piece of wood, but
yeah.
She responds, I say, have you got a squirrel? I mean a tame one. And I'm curious how that got in, if he's already finished Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where they already used the word tame and talked about tame things. And then one of the responses from Pattertwig, who...
Well, because Diggory says, it's almost tame.
Almost tame, yeah. And then Pattertwig, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but he chatters in his angriest voice, tame indeed. What do you mean by calling me tame? And he's saying all this, but all Polly hears is a chattering squirrel.
So interesting, yes. So Polly hears a squirrel making noise, but she can't interpret it the way that Diggory does. Polly says, there's nothing very tame about him that I can see. And Diggory's like, well, he was sitting on my knee just a moment ago. And so they go on. And Polly's like, you should try to catch him. I read in a book how to make a trap for squirrels. And the oak is like, oh, there you go, right? There, it's always about wanting to eat him or skin him or shut him up, right? Your only use of animals is not appreciating them, but is using them. Mm-hmm. Okay, Lewis was not a vegetarian. He's not saying here don't eat animals, but he's like, if you only view animals as the thing we eat or the thing we use, or if you only view the trees as the thing we use, then you're missing out on something greater. And again, it's the same thing he's saying about the humans. If you only view humans as things to be used, which is a very idea. I mean, this is what Lewis talks about when he's with Uncle Andrew. You're starting to get a little bit more of, well, I can do these things. I can use animals, and to, even if it's I'm kind of torturing these. They weren't hamsters, guinea pigs, whatever they were. Mm-hmm. It's fine because they all serve a purpose for me, and I can do whatever I want to them. And we're seeing some of that come out here, not Uncle Andrew, but actually
from Polly. Yeah.
Right. But what's different, so interesting here, Uncle Andrew is very much doing it and almost, in a more of an evil way, whereas Polly's doing it in an ignorant way. Right. Very different, but still, I think, making an interesting point by Lewis that Polly's not doing it on purpose. She's just ignorant of it all. But Lewis might be arguing, aren't most humans at this point? Yeah. At this point, meaning the late 40s. Or I guess technically this is the turn of the century for him, but for these characters. So what is Polly actually trying to do now?
She's trying to make a raft.
She's trying to make a raft. She says there's a stream at the bottom of her family's garden, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what should we do? Because it goes under this kind of tunnel, and no one really knows where it goes after that. And of course, Polly, this very much is like both of them. She's like, well, then we've got to explore it. There were very few children who were like, all right, there's a stream that goes into a tunnel and we can't see where it comes out at. We should definitely go inside.
And we're going to build our own raft to do it.
We're going to build our own raft to do it. Because I'm like, ooh, a tunnel, water into a tunnel that I can't see the exit. I'm like, that's like my worst nightmare, to go into that tunnel. But both these children want to go in. They want to build a raft together. Polly then says that, she's trying to build this raft. They're going to go in, and there's an exchange from Diggory that does not make him look great. Is Diggory's like, well, it's the tunnel gets, the ceiling is too low, so you really can't fit in there. And Polly's like, yeah, I'm just going to lay down. And he's like, oh, I never thought about laying down on the. It really does not make him look too bright.
He also thinks it's a magnificent plan, but is also ashamed.
Yeah. Well, then what does she need, though? Because here's a prop that occurs.
Well, so now they're going to make 2 rafts, and now they need some wood from the tree.
They need wood from the
because there's not enough that's already dead and fallen.
And this obviously puts Diggory in quite the predicament here.
And he does everything he can to get out of it. He makes up all these excuses.
Makes all these excuses. Well, I can do this and I can do that. He's like, she says, are you afraid of the grown-ups? Like, what is your issue? He can't really come out and say the oak is one of my oldest and best friends, right? But she just keeps saying, do it and do it. And then as she pressures him into doing this, before he actually cuts the branch off, here's again another line. Again, this I can't believe this didn't show up in a greater sense in the rest of the Chronicles, because it's so poignant. Polly says, or here, Diggory says before that, well, it isn't that, and I haven't got any grown-ups except the aunt who'd rather see all trees cut down than not. Polly says, then why on earth not cut a branch when we want one? Why wouldn't you just cut down a branch when you want it?
It's funny because I'm viewing this from our world where, like, yeah, why wouldn't you cut down a branch? And beyond that, we actually know that sometimes you need to cut branches. You need to be able to guide trees in a certain way, and trimming them back can actually help them be healthy. But fitting that into the kind of utilitarian mindset that we were talking about before, she truly doesn't understand why you wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
But what's even worse is Diggory does understand why not to do it.
Yeah.
And he does it anyway.
So I think it's actually Diggory who comes off way worse here than Polly. Polly is simply ignorant. She's saying, well, if I want a branch, I just take it. And it's again, this is not Lewis as some kind of like hippie guy of like never cut down a tree, just kind of, this, he didn't go to Woodstock or any of that stuff. This is Lewis.
Well, the Woodstock part wouldn't have happened because he
was dead.
He
did not.
He was dead.
I think that's like what, 67, 68, maybe 69.
I think so. It was in the later 60s.
Yeah, he was dead.
He died in 63.
So, yeah, it's. I think Lewis would be happy to not have seen the hippie movement come about.
Let me record this memo. Idea for a book: Lewis, Huxley, and JFK
all die on the same day.
No, they all go to Woodstock.
Oh, they all go to Woodstock. Huxley would have loved it. There were a lot of mind-altering substances that Huxley would have been much more interested in than either Lewis and. Well, I don't. Maybe JFK's a little more interested in them too. Lewis definitely not as interested in them.
I think JFK was on barbiturates, maybe.
I don't know.
For his back.
There's a lot of people who are really into JFK. I am not one of. Like, I meant like they're really into like the history of it all.
I thought you meant the airport.
Oh no, there's a lot of people in the airport. That's true. I have been once. Did not enjoy it. It was huge. Just did not enjoy big airports like that. Not my biggest.
Tune in to our Dancing Lawn bonus episode.
Rating airports.
Rating the airports that we've been to. Not all airports. Just the ones we've been to.
Get right now. Favorite airport? Go. Just to give people a glimpse into what they could be missing out on Dancing Lawn.
Dulles, man, because it's the airport of the future. You get to take a little bus across the parking lot to get to your plane.
We just literally flew back into Dulles yesterday, and we rode 3 buses to get from our car to the airplane, and it's like this is or actually technically this time from the airplane to our car because we were leaving. This is ridiculous.
Too many buses.
We have a bus from the parking lot to the terminal, and then another shuttle from the terminal to the. I guess we only rode 2. Never mind. So it's 3 different literal buildings we're in. I don't like that. I love a good small airport like Richmond, which is the one we have here, where
your flight can be at 9:30, but TSA closes at 8.
Yeah.
So you have to get there super early.
Yeah, we have how many, I think, gates? I think there's maybe 20 gates at the Richmond airport. It's incredible. I love it. You can show up and get through TSA in 15 minutes no matter when you show up, pretty much.
As long as it's before.
Yeah, as long as before
they go home.
Before they close. Do
you know the little thing that connects the airport to the plane that you walk through right before you get in the plane?
It's like the jet bridge or something. Is what
it's the umbilical corridor.
That's not the umbilical corridor.
Umbilical corridor. Look it up. Wow, we tried. We made it 46 minutes, and then we just put all of our tangents into one
thing.
Well, maybe we can mark it in the episode so that you can just
skip.
It's like an ad. You can just skip over.
It all falls apart in the middle for a moment, but then we bring it back. So Polly says, why not just cut a branch whenever we want one? And Diggory does eventually. He goes ahead. Polly says, you're enough to make anyone lose their temper. I never saw such a person. And Diggory does give in and decides to cut the branch. Let me read what he says here. Give me your beastly saw then, said Diggory furiously, snatching it out of her hand. A moment later, he was up on the top of the wall. He leaned towards the oak and said in a low voice, I say, Oak, do you mind very much? It's such a little branch. But the oak said nothing, and as Diggory laid hold of the branch he meant to cut, another branch somehow slapped him in the face so hard that it drew blood on his forehead and brought the tears into his eyes in good earnest. He began sawing.
Why would you begin sawing after that? It's so clear.
The tree literally smacks you.
You're bleeding. I mean, come on, man.
What?
I say that, but I also, if I was in the situation, I would probably do the same thing.
Sure, we've all been in this situation before. We've all given into temptation in this way where someone else can, we clearly know what the right thing is to do. And
but there's social pressure and you think that this is going to be better.
Even from Polly here, what's interesting is it's not like Polly is some horrible influence on him. Yeah, her worldview here is not great, but it's more just born out of ignorance than anything else, as we mentioned, constantly throughout this episode. Diggory is the one who knows what's right.
Right.
He's the one. And what's interesting is the connection we see here. It's here at the very beginning that we get the Garden of Eden moment.
Yeah. I've been thinking that too. Just there's so many parallels, but it's also not exact.
No, it's not at all.
It's so nice that it's not
It's much less exact than what actually happens in the real book.
Right.
Because in the real book, he goes into a literal garden and takes a literal apple. Now, again, he actually doesn't give in temptation, but it really happens. And the actual other temptation part is what happens in Charn. But here, we have it occur with him literally having kind of the Eve here saying to him, no, go do this. And he knows it's wrong, and he does it anyway.
Yep. And a moment later, Polly is asking him to come back down because there's a storm.
Yeah, this kind of moment of sin being birthed into the story is marked with this horrible thunderstorm, and they both run home. Before we continue in the story, because I wonder if this would have been maybe the end of chapter 1 here, if it was actually ever made into a book. Do you like this better than Ringing the Bell in Charn? Because that's really what Diggory, that's his other mistake he makes in chapter 4, or is it chapter 4 or 5 of Magician's Nephew. He goes and he rings the bell, right? And there it's Polly telling him, don't do it. And here he goes and does it. Do you like that story more, or do you like this one more of him sawing the oak?
Definitely the one that was actually published.
Really?
Yeah.
I like this one
so
much
like this
more.
One? Oh, good.
Oh, yeah.
Let's fight.
Okay, tell me why the other one's better.
I feel like the other one's more polished. It also seems to connect more things in terms of we have a character that we know from a different book.
Jadis coming in.
Jadis is coming in. And just it seems so much more powerful to have this thing that as long as he walks away from it, nothing will happen. but it's because he can't resist.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not being goaded into doing it. He just goes and does it because he really wants to know. I don't know. That whole thing seems to flow much better.
Yeah.
This one kind of has starts and stops, and she wants him to come down, and it does make sense for his character, but it also feels too early. They haven't established the relationship yet, and when it happens, once they know each other a little bit more, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a good argument. I think you're making it right now, too, that in Charn, it's really Diggory's kind of hubris and his arrogance, a little bit of curiosity, too, which lead him to ring the bell. Whereas here, it's just really peer pressure in a way, kind of a weakness of his own virtue to just not be able to stand up to Paul. Again, Polly's not even. I mean, she's being pushy here, but she's not like forcing him to do it. She's not being a bully. She's not being the kindest here. She's teasing him, but she's not being like awful about it. It's here. It is more just a personal failure. Whereas I think you could make the argument that kind of Diggory's fall into temptation in Charn is maybe more like Genesis 3, more like Adam's. Potentially, so that'd be a good thing. Yeah, I think I just love the tragedy of it here with the. I mean, this is dark, right?
Yeah.
Not just because the storm is coming. It's dark because Diggory is chopping the limb off of his friend, and he is kind of wrapped up in. He's got the tears coming, and it's unclear. Are the tears? It's probably both. A little bit of the tears from the pain of being slapped, and the tears from knowing what he's doing is very clearly wrong. And he's telling himself it's okay. Oh, it's just a little branch. You won't mind. We've all done this where you've said something like that, and no, it's actually a really big deal.
Yeah.
I love that at the beginning for Diggory. Very different than what we've seen in The Magician's Nephew, where when he does make the mistake with the hammer and the bell, we've seen him like stick up for Polly. We've seen him be brave and courageous, where he goes after Polly to save her because he knows Andrew's a coward. Up till this point, Diggory comes off pretty poorly here.
Yeah, that's another good point, is that when you see this as the first thing, you don't know anything else about his character, so now he's starting out as, quote, bad, whereas the other way that we see in the published version, he is mostly trying to be good and succeeding a lot of the time, and then he messes up, and it just hits different.
I do love kind of the biblical parallel, though. Right here at the very beginning of the story is where sin enters in. It's not, we've got a little bit in. No, it's like here at the very beginning, boom, done. Like we couldn't even get through the first few pages before, man.
He had the ability to understand animals and trees, and then now he's going to lose it.
Yeah. Well, let's move on because a storm occurs. There's even a break in the manuscript itself. There's kind of the very last paragraph. It says, "It did." Or here comes the rain. It did in torrents. Diggory was wet through before he had got back to the back door, but Cook saw to all that and had his clothes dry and him in bed and asleep hours before Aunt G came home. And then there's a kind of a break here, meaning that I wonder if that would be the end of chapter 1, that this would then begin chapter 2, which begins how?
With Aunt Gertrude at breakfast saying how inconvenient it is that Mrs. Lefay is coming.
It's so convenient, and as we hear about...
So convenient?
Oh, so inconvenient, excuse me. It's so inconvenient. There's another great educational line here that I've got to mention. Did you think that it would be something I would bring up?
This is something I plan to use with my own child.
Oh, okay.
Starting sentences with my whole aim in your education.
So Diggory kind of is speaking with his mouth full. He's asking about Mrs. Lefay, and Aunt Gertrude responds this way. What does she say about the whole aim of his education? And this is very much Lewis just completely telling you what's wrong with modern education through Aunt Gertrude, who we know is a bad person.
Yeah, she doesn't want to put the things in his head. She wants him to form opinions on his own.
She says, "My whole aim in your education is not to put opinions into your head, but to encourage you to form opinions on your own. That is why, but I see you are not attending. You're not paying attention, right?" This is one of those kind of ideas that has become so ubiquitous that it almost is like, well, yeah, that is the purpose of education. We want people to know, how to think, not what to think. And that is such the norm now, the way that we think about education, that we don't realize that Lewis absolutely has the strongest disdain for that kind of idea. Lewis would say, no. The purpose of education is for me to tell you how to feel about something. It's for me to tell you what your opinions should be, right? It's for me to actually, and so he would say, no, it's about me telling you that you need to actually love the things that are good and hate the things that are bad.
Yeah.
And Aunt Gertrude, in this very modern idea, is like, no, I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong. I'm going to let you figure that out for yourself. But as anyone who spent any time with kids, I'm sure your son is not quite there yet, being just a few months old, but very soon, you'll get to experience those moments when you're like, okay, no one taught you to be bad and you've just done something really naughty. Where did that come from, right?
Yeah.
We're starting to get that with my daughter, who's getting close to a year old. It's not quite happening with her yet either. But we're like, she seems to kind of enjoy being naughty every once in a while. I don't think she fully gets it yet, but I know it's coming in the next year or so. We're just, you're just a sinner. Like, it just happens. So actually, maybe you do need to be taught how to behave. You do need to be taught what good opinions are, what bad opinions are. You need to taught how to, do these things.
It's so strange to hear this because even though I know that we do need to be taught right and wrong, it's still wild to think like, like you shouldn't tell someone what to think.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Even though telling someone that is telling them what to think.
It's so interesting. And on the next page, she goes on a little bit. Let me actually read this next part because it has to do with it. And then I wanted to pose a question to you. Aunt Gertrude goes on to say this. I was going to say when you interrupted me, the last thing I would wish to do is to influence your opinions about Mrs. Lefay or about anyone else. I personally may not think her either a very useful citizen or a very enlightened woman. I may even consider her manners impertinent and her habits unhygienic. I may wonder what induced your father and mother to select such a person. I may be unable to see that whole institution of godparents fulfills any useful function. But I don't want you to take any of these opinions ready-made. You must meet her with an open mind. This is so ridiculous. Let me tell you everything I believe, but you should figure it out on your own.
Right. But yeah, while also saying I'm not going to tell you what to think. Yeah.
A question I had for you, Phil, and I wrote it in my own margins here, is it possible, do you think, to give an open-minded education? Or let's not even think, not even education, but think about it as a parent. Can you raise your child in an open-minded fashion? And what I mean by that is not open-minded as in, just being thoughtful about others or you trying to, being empathetic. I'm talking about as being I'm going to let you form your opinions and ideas on your own.
I think there can be elements of that, but probably not to the extreme that people
What kind of elements? Tell me more. I'm intrigued. I don't have some kind of something going to throw back at you. I think this is a good conversation to have.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind is you have things that maybe don't matter a ton. So this movie's good, this movie's bad. You can show them things that you consider good. Mm-hmm. But I think that what's tough about younger kids, and this includes us when we were younger kids, is we like certain things because it's targeted toward us and we're at a certain age, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's great stuff. I don't know if Trolls World Tour is a good movie. I haven't seen it
either, and I don't know.
But I'm guessing it's not the greatest work of art. But I do think that those
if
things
anyone
appeal
listens
to
to this
people.
podcast in 40 years will have never have heard of Trolls World Tour. They'll still have heard of Star Wars. They will not have heard of Trolls World Tour. It's not going to stand the test of time.
Yeah. We'll see.
Neither will this podcast. No one's listening to this in
If
40
you're
years
listening
either,
to this in 2064.
Yeah. Let us know. What are we up to these days? Is the pod? There's no way it's still going 40 years from now, right?
Send us a mind email.
Are Phil and I at least still friends?
Yeah, probably.
Dude, we're old. We're in our 70s.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Probably can't even hear this.
Sorry, keep going.
There's a great Andy Griffith episode where this guy is hanging around the main character's son and teaching him all these things, but he's teaching him kind of illegal things, how to steal stuff, how to do all this stuff. And the main character, the sheriff, asks him to stop. And the guy goes, why won't you you should let the boy choose for himself. He goes, no, if I do that, he's going to choose the shiniest, newest thing, whatever looks good in the moment. But he doesn't know the consequences, but his dad does, and his dad's responsibility is to be looking out for him and to teach him that maybe the shiny thing isn't the right thing to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that way with content or something you're reading. It's really hard to know because you don't necessarily know the consequences. But also sometimes as you get older, that is how you learn. But I think when you're super young, you have to have a wise adult guiding you through those things.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with a classmate of mine in college, or maybe it was grad school actually, where it was and it was not an adversarial one. It was legitimately a great conversation between two people who didn't agree on a lot of things, but were legitimately curious about one another's like thought process behind how they arrived at different things. And the person I was talking about with knew that I worked at a Christian school and was like, yeah, I just think and again, I'm going to make it sound like they said it in a less kind way, but they literally said this in a very kind, thoughtful way. Like, let me learn more about you. It was not antagonistic at all. But pretty much what they were saying is, yeah, it just seems to me like a Christian education would be like indoctrinating someone, right? Or he even said that, I think when I have kids, even if I was religious, I would not raise them religious because that's something they would have to choose on their own, right? And one of the things that was interesting, and again, this is a very intelligent person. This is not somebody who was just like, oh, I just want to do whatever the world tells me. I mean, this is someone who really had come to these conclusions, I believe, through a lot of thinking. And what was interesting is we were talking, and I was hearing from him too. I was like, one of the things that I think I felt a little bit of that pressure the same way that you had felt this. I don't want to tell someone how to think. I don't want to tell someone what opinions they should have. And then I thought about, one of the questions I asked my friend, and it was not like a gotcha thing. It was like hey, let me understand from your perspective. Because from my perspective, it seems like there's a bit of this kind of logical fallacy occurring. Because what you're saying is, I wouldn't raise my own kids to be religious because that's for them to because I don't want to put my values onto them. I was like, well, I'm sure this person was, again, this person was not religious. They were just hypothetically speaking. I was like, well, I'm sure there's some beliefs that you have about people or about lifestyles and all these things that you would say you would not want your child to feel this way, one way or another, or you have a certain way you want your kid to feel about how they should treat other people. Everyone who is a sane, reasonable person would say they want their children to recognize the dignity of every human being. Now, as Christians, we believe that's because of the Imago Dei in everyone, but even non-Christians, for the vast majority of them, would agree with that statement, and that in and of itself is a form of indoctrination, right? So, you actually don't want your kid to have an open mind about racism, right? You're not like, you know what, we just really want our kid to have an open mind about how to treat other people, or we want our kid to have an open mind about sexism. Of course you don't. Of course you don't. And so I'm wondering, is there any room for any kind of open-mindedness about those non-serious things? That's where I'm like, I even wonder about that. And I don't have an answer, but that's why I'm wonder about the less important things. Is it? Can I teach my kid to be open-minded about Trolls World Tour? I don't know.
Yeah, I think there has to be a balance, right?
No, there has to be. I just don't know what it is.
You have to get the important stuff, and then you also have to allow room for maybe the things that don't matter, and then even choosing which things do matter and which ones don't matter.
I just think this is so... I'm just so surprised that Lewis doesn't return to this. I think he does return to this a lot. I mean, this to me is like That Hideous Strength and Abolition of Man Lewis coming out in a Narnia book, which we really don't see anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I wonder if almost in some ways he feels as if it gets a little too preachy. Because if you think about after finishing Wardrobe, he goes into Caspian, Dawn Treader, and Silver Chair, all of which are, and even Horse and His Boy, the way they're published at least, all of which are much less connected to very biblical stories or ideas. You then end with Magician's Nephew, which is the creation and the fall, and then you end with The Last Battle, which, right, is the end times. But the 4 books in the middle there are much less kind of, the supposals are even thinner, right, than you see in Wardrobe and in the final 2 books. So I wonder if you felt like, this is maybe getting a little too on the nose.
Yeah, or maybe he saw an outlet for it in other works.
He's already written the other ones, though.
Those are already out.
Yeah, they're
maybe he doesn't want to repeat them.
In 43, I think. I think they're both 43.
I didn't realize those were so early. Cool.
Yeah, no, they're both public. And remember, at this point, not because for Lewis, he's getting older in age. He's near in the last 15 years of his life here, and most of his major works of fiction have been published. Obviously, outside of Till We Have Faces has not been published yet, and then most of his apologetic work has all been published at this point. At this point, the only thing left to publish is a lot of academic works, Till We Have Faces, and A Grief Observed.
And Narnia.
And Narnia, obviously, yeah. So, it's an interesting place in his career.
It is.
So Phil, after Aunt Gertrude tells him about his godmother coming, he does have the horrible realization that he can no longer talk to the trees and to the squirrels and the birds and the beasts.
It's just devastating to him.
Yeah, it's horrific.
And his godmother sees it on his face instantly.
Oh, and even before she notices it, there's the one quick aside where Diggory wonders that maybe actually it's not them who have changed, but it's a change that's occurred inside of him, which I think is very important. That he starts to wonder, hey, I wonder if it's actually me who has changed here. But then you're right that the godmother shows up and she notices these things. In fact, she says, "You look exactly like what Adam must have looked 5 minutes after he'd been turned out of the Garden of Eden."
Just in case you didn't get the connection.
In case you hadn't picked up on it yet.
Here's a club to hit you over the head with it. It basically seems like she knows way more about a magical land or being able to talk to creatures or something than he initially may have thought. And it's not said directly, but it's certainly alluded to several times.
And we again see that, Aunt Gertrude's here for this too. They clearly don't like each other. And even the not fairy godmother, but Lefay, the godmother, is very off-putting in her appearance to Diggory, right? She's not very attractive looking, I think. And it almost scares Diggory a little bit. But he really seems to like her personality and kind of the way that she kind of sticks up to Gertrude here.
And the way she's able to tell when he's lying and when he's telling the truth. She just seems to have some abilities, some flashes in her eyes. And I think both we as readers are interested in her and we want to know more. And then we're invited to go visit her.
Yeah.
We just don't have the full address because it cuts off.
Yeah. So here's a little bit of this last page I think is worth, spending a bit of time on before we end this episode. You're right that he gets called out for lying. She's like, I know that something's wrong. This is where she says, you look like Adam after he's been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And this is all after Gertrude has left. And she says, what do you keep staring at? He's like, well, there's something in your bag. The response here is weird. Lefay says, oh, him? What do you think that's about here?
Well, you can see him, but hands off with all capital H, capital O.
What does she pull out here?
She pulls out a rabbit. She literally pulls a rabbit out of a bag.
Yep.
And its name is Coiny.
Coiny.
And it's not a present for him.
No.
And then he's very indignant. He said, I didn't think it was.
He's like, I didn't think that. I was just wondering why you had a rabbit in your...
And then she's like, well, you're telling the truth.
Yes, I know. I see you're telling the truth. And she says, I only wanted to make you angry here. Again, this is just really odd. And we're getting so close to the end, which is why it's so frustrating. Because you're like, wait, what is going on? She says, I only wanted to make you angry with this whole kind of the rabbit thing and saying that I think you want it, even though I know you don't want it. And he's like, why? Well, he's like, to see what you'd look like, of course. To see if the right flash in your eye. If you hadn't lost that anyway, though I think you've lost something else in the last day or so. She then goes on.
She knows.
Why don't you go ahead and just read from the and now, right after something in the last day or so.
This is the very end. And now I don't want to waste any more time. Here's my card with my address on it. And if you ever want to see me, take in all these directions because I don't mean to say everything twice over. You can catch a tram outside this house, and that will take you to Ravelstone Circus. Then look all around the circus till you see Little Antrim Street. Then go along that on the left side till you come to Cuckoo Court. Then go down the court on the right side till you come to a furniture shop that sells birds and pictures. Then you must go into the shop, and you'll see.
The end.
Yep. And then it switches back to Walter Hooper.
Yeah, just saying, see what? He's
see
like,
what?
We will.
No one knows.
No one knows because the manuscript breaks off at this point. Again, we don't really know what's going on. It's unclear, right? We know that Uncle Andrew says he has a bad fairy godmother. It's unclear. Is she? She seems to be kind of good, but she also could just be putting on airs. Think about how good the White Witch appeared to Edmund when he first met her. So we don't really know exactly who she is, what she wants, what she's doing, and we never will find out. Maybe that's what you can ask Lewis when you get to heaven. Hey, can you please tell me?
I've thought that 3 times in this episode. Just maybe we will get to know.
He'll be like, oh my gosh. She's like, I've said this so many. He'll probably just has like a business card that's like, don't ask me about Lefay Fragment. Here's what it was, you know? Or, you know, honestly.
People have been asking me about this for an eternity.
Yeah. He probably doesn't know himself in many ways because he gave up the fragment here.
I thought I told him to burn all that stuff.
Hey, you guys should know about this. No, because we know he gets stuck here. He doesn't want to continue it. And so for all we know, he doesn't know what came next. In fact, he probably doesn't.
Yeah.
Because he abandons the story and goes to work on Prince Caspian next.
It's not the final product, but it's not resolved.
No.
Yeah.
And he abandons the story so much that he doesn't return to Magician's Nephew for quite a bit of time. He goes on to a brand new book, not even a prequel, but to a sequel instead, which is so interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, final thoughts on Lefay Fragment here. We've talked a lot about this. It's been great to get into this finally and chat about it. Any final thoughts on the Lefay Fragment?
I would love to see more of these. Maybe someday we'll find something. I really doubt it. But I'm really grateful for the opportunity to peek into what this draft looked like, how much it changed, but also how many different pieces made it either into the final book or into other books in the series. And I'm also grateful for the commentary around it. Right after this section ends, there's actually a really helpful couple of pages comparing this to the actual published version. And I'm also excited to see the diary entries from Eustace and then to compare them to what was actually published. Maybe read them back to back or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All we know after this is that Roger Lancelin Green, one of the Inklings, there in the latter part of the Inklings' time, Roger Lancelin Green, who also named the Chronicles of Narnia as well, he told Walter Hooper that Lewis read this fragment to him in the summer of 1949. That's how we know that it must have been written before then, because he says, yeah, it was sometime then. But other than that, we just know so little about it. It's exciting because this is what all of our Tolkien friends get to do all the time, because they have
everything.
Literally the history of Middle Earth, which if listeners are not familiar with is, especially books 6 through 10, I think, which are the literal manuscripts of the Lord of the Rings. The first one is like the Return of the Shadow. It goes all the way through Sauron Defeated, I think is the last one. And it's Christopher Tolkien's commentary on his father's manuscripts, where we even have Bingo Baggins, and we have, you can get all of this stuff. I've read most of the Return of the Shadow, and it's just wild. It's I've skimmed through. I haven't read the entire thing, but you go through parts of it, and it's crazy because you get to be, oh wow, he did this, and then you read a couple next fragments. I see how he's changing it. Kind of, you see with each fragment how it changes and each manuscript, and we just don't have that from Lewis. So, man, I'm a little jealous of all the Tolkien podcasters out there who get to do this.
I do feel like it makes it even more valuable to have this one piece.
Yes.
If we had 3 or 4 or 8 or 9 or hundreds of them, it wouldn't quite be the same. It'd be like, there's too many of these.
We will obviously probably cover The Hobbit one day on this show, as it is a classic work of children's literature. And when we do that, Phil, I have up on my bookshelf the history of The Hobbit, which is, I believe John Ratcliffe had it. Why don't you talk like you're at the bookshelf? I'll tell you how many pages of manuscripts of The Hobbit it is.
Is it that big, thick one? Daniel's walking away, but... Oh, yep, it is the big, thick one. Oh, man.
This is a tome.
That is a tome.
It is about 930 pages, and a good part of it is of his manuscripts of The Hobbit. And you can really read through it and see all the ways that The Hobbit changed. It contains the complete unpublished manuscript of The Hobbit. So when we do cover The Hobbit, Phil, you will have to read the entire... I can't read it. This is way too long for me. So I'm going to just read the regular Hobbit, which is 200 pages,
right.
And you can read this giant thing.
But
I am excited. Like this, the kind of stuff, like, just reading through different parts of it is just so interesting to get inside the minds of these geniuses.
That's the perfect kind of thing. If you really enjoyed something and you want to know more, to get to see what did the script look like, what did the outline look like,
yeah.
what did the piece of scratch paper that had a few notes about the characters and who they would become. It's really wonderful that we live in a time where we can see all that.
Well, Phil, that's the end of this chapter and this whole book, I guess.
Yeah. This fragment.
This fragment here.
This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Ashlyn Washburn, Andrew Trophy, and Becca Brown for supporting us at our top tiers. You can contact us by sending us real physical mail to P.O. Box 25854.
Did I tell you that someone sent us mail?
We got a piece of mail.
Was
it a banana?
No, we got a package of some kind, and they don't have it. I went to go pick it up.
They lost it.
And they could not find it anywhere. And I was confused, so I don't want to blame the mail people at all because I don't know what. But I go to get it, and I give them the slip. I'm like, hey, I found the slip in my box, and the lady was like, oh, this is from January. So someone sent us. So if this is you, if you sent us something in January, we didn't get it. Somebody sent this. She's like, oh, it's a box. It wouldn't fit in the P.O. box. So
it's probably cash.
We held on to it. But it didn't. We did not get a notification that I had anything because I only go to the PO box if we usually get
a notification.
A notification to go check it because I have us signed up. So if anything gets put in there, we get.
We should get a FedEx or a UPS box.
Obviously, because I was like, "Do you have any idea what it was?" She's like, "Well, it was big enough to not fit in your box." I was like, "So it could have been cool or something." I don't know what it was.
Yeah. I bet it was Turkish delight. I bet it was a lot of Turkish delight.
You think so?
Did you ask her if it was covered in ants?
Well, the lady was. I mean, she was really apologetic, and I was like, "It's not your fault." Like, I don't think it's your fault. I'm not upset with you. And it's one of those things where I felt so bad because you could tell she was preparing for me to yell at her. Like, I'm sure that's what this woman has to get all the time.
People are very passionate about their postcards.
Yes, and so I was like, no. It's just like, I'm really sorry. I'm like, it's okay. Like, there's nothing you could, it doesn't mean it was necessarily you. But I was like, yeah, is there any other way we could, if we get? She's like, yeah, you should always be getting stuff in the mail. There was a card in there that someone, I'm actually writing back to someone right now because someone sent us a piece of mail. But again, I just checked it here at the end of June, and it was written months ago. Yeah. But I hadn't gone by. I didn't know to go by.
Yeah, because there's no notification.
So now I'm like, maybe I'll just go by every month and just check. So sorry if anyone else has been like, wow, these guys said they would respond to our mail, and then they haven't been. Our apologies.
So if you want to contact us with a 50% chance of it getting through, send a P.O. Box 25854, Richmond, Virginia 23232.
Maybe just to start out, shoot us an email that you mailed us something just so we know. Because I'm a little worried that we've set up this P.O. Box, which is literally costing us money, and so far we have not appropriately responded to anything we have gotten.
Maybe just to be safe, pop that bad boy in the scanner, scan it in, send us a JPEG. You can also email us at hello@lamppostlistener.com or leave us a voicemail or a fax at 406-646-6733. You can also find links to past guests, reference books, and other things at lamppostlistener.com. Thank you for coming along on this journey. Until next time, further up and further in.